G'day and welcome to the Good Sources. It's not Q&A, not Q&A, hashtag not Q&A Quanda, not Quanda, A&D. Don't use the ampersand if you're going to use the hashtag. I'm Dave Pello, one of your hosts tonight from the Good Source platform, and joining me also is the right-thinking queen of Twitter, Alexandra Marshall. Welcome to Not Q&A again. Ellie, how are you?
I did not realise I was a co-host. Does that mean I have power?
Every single Good Source regular contributor is a co-host, and we may have the occasional guest. But well said, because tonight we do have a couple of great guests coming on, just for a short segment each. And first up, in a few minutes, we will be talking to the federal leader of the One Nation Party, Pauline Hanson. So we'll be having a chat to her about the family law court review, which has been happening, and anything else in the world of One Nation and the nation, Australia. We'll also be having a chat with Anthony Dillon later towards the end of the first hour. He's an Indigenous Anglo academic in Australia, and he's written some pretty good articles and memes about the people protesting Australia Day, which is obviously still a very hot topic this week. But Ellie, you posted a pretty good article on the Good Source this week talking about the field of false flags. So for everybody's interest, they can jump onto the goodsource.news website and have a look at Ellie's article there. But why don't you just recap some of what thoughts you were articulating in that article for us now?
Well, first of all, what a great time to have the name One Nation as a party name, considering we are talking about bringing together Australia as one nation during a fractious time in our history. So what a great topic for today to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, the article, The Field of False Flags, is really about Antifa, which they brand themselves as being, anti-fascists, the people who fight communism, but the people who fight Nazism. But what they really are the original communists. They are the activist youth wing of the Communist Party. And I don't think many of our media commentators really understand the history behind this party and how it is very much alive in the leaders of the activist movement today. They're still running around with Mao and Stalin on their shirts. They haven't left behind their history. So the article, The Field of False Flags, was about two things. The first was Biden's empty victory via this new digital new normal age where we are all disconnected from our politicians and from each other, leaving us with basically flags in place of cheering crowds and no way to measure the true pulse of the nation, because we're not there together as a group. And the second was Antifa's role in that eventuality with the election, and how these activist pressure groups are working in combination with social media giants in order to change the narrative of our civilization from a position of a minority group, because they are not they're not the majority, but they are able to exert immense power. So that's the premise of the article that I wrote for you guys. I think it was last week.
Yeah, no, it was a great article and a great story, and it was very aptly illustrated by the field of flags where there used to be people for the last presidential inauguration.
That image struck me because you've got an empty field there, and Biden's supposed to be the most popular president to ever be elected into US history, with Trump alone outstripping Obama. And yet they couldn't even manage to host an inauguration, despite the fact that their voters are out on the streets, in their thousands, protesting with Black Lives Matter and Antifa. It's an unsettling and unnerving vision to see America in that way.
It really was. One of the hallmarks of Biden's presidency already has been the complete humiliation of Barack Obama and Donald Trump with the sheer quantity of executive orders issued in the first week, ruling by executive fiat. Now, somebody else who's tried that on without anywhere near the level of success Joe Biden has is our own Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Arbitrarily and authoritarianly, really, without any wide consultation, deciding we need to change the lyrics to the Australian national anthem. What's your thought? Is that an abuse of his position?
How successful was changing the anthem? I mean, there were no protests whatsoever about Australia Day after Scott Morrison changed the anthem. It completely solved the activist problem in this nation. So well done, Scott Morrison. You found the solution to Marxism in Australia. I think, everyone should just change everything now and it'll work.
Well, we've certainly achieved reconciliation. There's now no more Aboriginal suffering, trauma, or grievance politics anywhere to be seen anymore. I don't know what the media is going to do next Australia Day. Maybe it just didn't have enough time to take hold this year, Alexandra.
Oh, definitely. The time is clearly what our problem is. It's not the monetization of victimhood. That couldn't possibly be the problem that's overtaking the Western world right now. And America has the exact same problem. They're starting to turn victimhood into a money-making operation. So we saw during the Antifa and Black Lives Matter rallies, particularly in Chaz, I don't know if you guys remember the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which was meant to be the dry run for the Antifa glorious new revolution, where the first thing they did was sit everyone down and start demanding taxes based upon race. So it's the same thing in Australia. We saw posts from some of the activists demanding $1 million for, as they put it, every Black person, regardless of situation, circumstance, or any kind of reasoning other than racial logic.
Yep.
So the only way we're going to get past this is if we stop allowing activism to be monetized to the extent that there's no solution, because they don't want to solve any of their problems, because if they do, they'll put themselves out of business.
No, that would end the grievance industry altogether very quickly. Look, the effectiveness of that executive order from Scott Morrison aside, I don't know if we can technically call it an executive order, but that is what it is, whether that's its proper name or not. What do you think about his decision, his thoughts on using and exercising that power? A, does he actually have that legal power? And B, should he use it the way he did, effectiveness aside?
Well, the problem with the Australian system, which is also its strength depending on who is leading it, is that we are a copy of the Westminster system, in that most of our political activities are based upon convention, including many of our laws. So Scott Morrison can and does change things with the authority of being leader of the current ruling party, but that doesn't mean that he's going to get off scot-free, you might say, with his decision, because with the changing of the anthem, not only did he do nothing to make the left happy with him or to stop protests, because that's not what they really want. If you read their posts, they say, no justice, no peace, we're going to hate Australia forever. So that's not going to work. What he did do was irritate the blue ribbon base, the people he really desperately needs to put him back in power. And for Scott Morrison, who already has a problem of being Turnbull light, he was part of Turnbull's inner circle, and more people are starting to realize that actually was the case. He has a problem with his conservative identity, and the last thing that he needs is to be seen as cuddling up to left-wing Marxist ideology, because his base are going to go and find other parties. And unfortunately, that actually won't lead to an election of a conservative minority. What it will do is lead to a Labor victory in the next election. And it's almost as if you can't stop this cycle from happening, because the politicians and the Liberals have got it in their heads that if they make the press happy, then somehow they'll get more votes from the left. And it's simply never going to happen. But the wets aren't going anywhere. So I wrote a whole piece today in The Spectator about the death of basically Menzies Liberal Party, and how Craig Kelly is one of the last remaining figures that stands for true liberalism in the Australian sense of the word liberal. Yep,
absolutely. The other article that got published today on The Good Source was an excellent piece by Kurt Marlberg, and Kurt joins us now all the way from, I think you're in Sydney now, Kurt. You used to be in Adelaide. How are you this evening, and welcome to the show?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yes, that's right. Formerly Adelaide, now Sydney, and it's great to be with you.
And what do you think? Scott Morrison's riding high on the polls. The grapevine has it we could be up for a federal election before the end of this year. This captain's call, if you'd like, the executive order in a very Biden-esque move of changing the lyrics to the national anthem somewhat arbitrarily and perhaps foolishly. What do you think? Does that play to support his re-election chances, or is that actually a counterproductive move that he can afford with high polls right now?
I'd probably go with the latter. I think from what I've seen of the polling, he's sitting fairly comfortably, so I don't think it's going to affect things too much. But as Ellie was saying, I don't think that decision is going to bode well with his blue ribbon base, as you might say. I think I actually had no idea about this decision in the lead up. There was no notice about it. I think I read it on Twitter. It was actually the tweet by Scott Morrison himself, and I just thought, like, why does the leader of a nation just get to tweak the lyrics to our national anthem? I thought it was quite bizarre, to be honest. And I agree with Ellie that, pandering to that that idea is only going to get you so far, because then it's going to be the next issue. So I don't think it's certainly going to help, but given his standing in the polls, I don't think it's going to harm him too much at this stage.
Now, somebody was telling me recently things I didn't know. It was actually Grant Vandersea, who also writes some articles on The Good Source, and he was explaining how many times the national anthem lyrics have actually changed. Given the history of it, I actually don't think our national pride has suffered a mortal wound by any extent. The original song was slimmed down a lot before it became the national anthem, and there were some other changes there. I could try and scrape my memory, but do either of you know off the top of your head lyrics that have already been changed previously in the national anthem?
Well, I don't know the lyrics, but the idea of changing our anthem, we have to remember that Australia is a young country as far as being a coherent geopolitical force in the world. And so we were changing our anthem because we were new at deciding what we wanted to say and represent as a nation. And then it settled into quite a good, a solid medium for an anthem. No, it's not like the French. We're not suggesting we drag people over bloody fields or anything. Like, our anthem's pretty good. You've got to remember, this is a thing that we sing on sporting events at the global stage. It's not meant to be, you can't have it too obscure or it won't work. It has to be a bit pompous and a bit, stifled, because otherwise it's just not going to stand up at a flagpole in front of, crowds of disinterested people. So our anthem was pretty good. The reason that we're changing it now is not because it's wrong. It's because we've got a small pressure group of Marxists who hate the entire concept of a nation, attempting to chip away at everything that belongs to the idea of a nation. They're after the flag, they're after our anthem, they're after our basic ideals and laws. So you have to view it in context of the bigger picture of what is actually happening with the activist movement and why it matters that Scott Morrison taking this call without even asking the population, hey, what do you think of eroding this particular part of our nation? So you have to remember that Captain Call's difficult because you take all the credit, but you also take all the blame. And the Liberal Party decides that it wasn't a good move, they will just cut Scott Morrison and say, oh, that was him, not us, we'll put it back. And the same thing will happen to Biden. And I suspect
I actually remember the lyrics that we have changed in the past, and obviously not in my memory, but the lyrics originally were Australian sons, or Australia's sons, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. Obviously now Australians all let us rejoice. So maybe we didn't get rid of feminism by degendering the lyrics. We're not going to get rid of Marxism by de-age clarifying the content. On one hand, we're not young. Our constitution is one of the 10 oldest still surviving operational functional constitutions in the world, which doesn't speak very well for other nations, that they don't even last a century.
That's not a good sign.
But as far as a legally constituted nation goes, it's true, we're not young. We're one of the oldest in our current constitutions. Obviously, the way you said it before, Ali, was nations like France that had heaps of constitutions, even though they've always been a legally constituted nation a lot longer than Australia. So
you talk about France as going back to, its previous iterations of its politics. You wouldn't say that France is only from that most recent one. We're talking about the coherency of a nation that has power on a political stage. So that's sort of how you define the birth of a nation.
Yeah, no, totally get that. I don't know if you've seen the news, but there's been a tragic murder in Queensland where a dangerous driver, a 17-year-old P-plater, ran over a couple and their preborn baby, killing 3 living humans. And there's quite a lot of political commentary going on. Anastasia Palaszczuk is mad that he was out on bail. And there's a whole lot of people blaming Anastasia Palaszczuk for being soft on youth crime, etc. What's your thoughts, Kurt? Do you have? Are you familiar with the story? Do you have any opinion on who to blame and how do we prevent this kind of thing from happening again?
No, I haven't actually heard of this particular story, though I feel like in Queensland a few years ago something similar did happen, and it was actually something that the pro-life and pro-choice camp had a bit of a tussle over, because in that particular case the unborn child was considered to be a human under the law, and so therefore it was some sort of manslaughter or murder that was essentially the charge being brought against the person. Whereas obviously when it comes to abortion, we sort of as a culture we tend to just dismiss that as though the preborn baby is not a human, and so that's a case I remember more recently. But no, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with this one.
Alexandra, I've got some thoughts, but I just want to get everybody else's thoughts first. What's going on? This guy was charged and has been, arrested and charged for dangerous driving. He's then released on bail. He then drives recklessly, and I don't want to make up details I'm not 100% confident on, but the result is he's driven so badly again after already being arrested for dangerous driving, he's ended up killing 3 living humans. What's your thoughts on, is this just the nature of a soft justice system that, can't throw everybody in jail just because they've been charged, or are you familiar with the details, Ali?
What you're really asking is the criticism of Anastasia Palaszczuk's her stance on crime fair?
Yeah.
And it's not just Anastasia Palaszczuk's government that has a problem with releasing criminals and not punishing criminals properly, because all of Australia's states have a problem with our soft approach to serious crime, which has led to an increase in crime overall. And the United States, which we were talking about before, learned this lesson when they were trying to clean up some of their most violent cities, that the softer you go on crime and the shorter you make the jail sentences and the more you try to rehabilitate violent criminals by releasing them on good behavior, the more your crime skyrockets. But whereas if you actually punish severe crime properly, people get the message. We learnt this a long time ago in civilization, that you punish serious crime seriously and it tends to stop crime from happening. So yes, although Anastasia Palaszczuk is not particularly responsible for this incident, her government's approach to crime has led to criminal behavior increasing, particularly as we see now. I don't know how many of you notice it, but we see dangerous behavior going unpunished all the time, but there's always a cop out on the road there to basically, as a portable ATM, getting people for ever more minor infractions that attract fines. And that's the same thing with COVID. They're very happy to fine ordinary people enormous COVID fines, but they're not going to go after serious crime and people are being murdered or broken into. That stuff is too hard. The activist judges don't want to touch it. So we definitely have an issue with crime in this country and an inability to punish the people who should be punished properly, whereas we're punishing basically good citizens for minor infractions extremely severely, usually for a sort of a tip for the government's budget.
Yeah. Well, my thought is that I hope that not a single person criticising Anastasia Palaszczuk's soft stance on criminal justice for people under 18 voted Labor. In my mind, the reason that couple is dead tonight is because of Labor voters. You're the idiots that voted for an incompetent government with proven incompetence who are not willing to be tough on crime. They would rather set people on the streets than have jails crowded or kids possibly getting the rough end of the stick. Well, I'm sorry. If you're going to drive your car like a lethal weapon and use it as such, recklessly and irresponsibly, you don't deserve freedom. You certainly don't deserve a car or a license. You darken the door of a car again, that thing should be crushed like a can of sardines. But it's the Labor voters of Townsville, a town ravaged by youth criminality, roaming the streets at night. It's those morons who still voted for a Labor government to have more of the same, which has resulted in the hands of police being tied and the legislation being inadequate for magistrates to do what they need to do. In my mind, if we're just going to get more and more like this. Labor voters, again, have blood on their hands tonight, and if that's harsh, well, don't vote Labor.
Well, you've seen what the Black Lives Matter community are demanding in the US, haven't you? They want to release all criminals from jail.
Exactly.
All of them.
Exactly.
That's one of their major demands.
Yep. And this is just leftism for you. So no leftist, no person who votes left of centre has any business complaining about the results of criminality and crime rates in the community. You just have no business blaming the government for doing what you reward them for doing. They go soft on crime, you vote them back in. What do you think's going to happen? Criminals are going to do what criminals do. They don't respect the law. The only thing you can do is take their liberty off them.
You can't say defund the police and then have a hissy fit when Capitol Hill riots come and there's not enough police to stop people from coming in. You can't have it both ways. It's either anarchy or it's not.
Yep.
It does seem to me to, Dave, it does seem to me to stem from this idea, I guess, that everyone at base level is well-intentioned and there's no real sort of moral evil in the heart, and it's, we're all reformable. I think it's an optimistic but ultimately fatal worldview that leads to this idea that, serious crime doesn't need a serious punishment. And I think that's probably where a lot of the misunderstanding is.
It's very Pollyanna-ish. It definitely is. Look, I've got some bad news for everyone. I have to apologise. The life of a federal party leader and senator can be unpredictable, and Senator Pauline Hanson has had to offer her apologies. She won't be able to be joining us tonight, but I'm sure she will be trying to again, maybe next week or very, very soon. We still have a great guest coming up. But let's talk about the Family Law Court review that is coming up. I believe it's due at the end of February or March. And that's now been more than a year in the process of being done. It was commenced in 2019. We had all of last year, and it'll be well into this year before that review is handed down. And of course, the lefties, again, think it's working wonderfully. They don't want it changed at all. They don't want anything to be upset in the current way that things happen, even though each of the magistrates and judges in the Family Law Court, each of them have hundreds of cases on the go at any one time. And some of them ridiculously multiplied, hundreds of cases going on there at the time. One of the big things I would like to see changed in the Family Law Court system is the fact that there are perverse incentives for there to be delays and adjournments, games, and all. It's always going to be in one person's interest to make things go longer and longer and longer, which of course the lawyers are not at all upset about, as they keep getting chances to charge more and more and more. We see women incentivized to take kids away from their fathers, because the less time the father has with them, the more money he has to pay to the mother for the care of the children, which he may or may not spend on the children. And we see all kinds of false accusations without any need for evidence or proof to be substantiated and have impacts on the family custody arrangements. Again, weaponizing the children's and treating them. I think one of the things I would like to see reformed in the family law reform is to see abuse of judicial process brought in to essentially be the same as child abuse, to take kids away from one of their parents. I don't care about the gender, but to take kids away from their parents because you're playing silly legal games in the Family Law Court for kids at any age to be denied access to one parent before there's any kind of justice, being able to some objective justice, prejudicially taking a parent away from their kids is devastating to a parent, but absolute abuse of a child's formative years. Kurt, Alexandra, are there any things you're aware of that are strikingly obvious that need to be changed in the family law court system?
Do you want to go first, or?
You go for Ellie.
All right. There's a reason that they call lawyers vampires, and not in the cool sci-fi hot sense, in the more traditional, less appreciative sense. And that's because when you've got a system that allows money to prolong people's suffering for no other reason than profit of a third party, you've got a problem with the law, because the law was designed to solve problems, not to basically be a massive industry for making more money. And once you start abusing civilization's system of law to the point where it's beyond a joke, the law itself starts to fall down. And a lot of the problems that the family industry has is that not only are cases making it to the courts and dragging on forever, but a lot of people who should be in the courts and who need a moderator and a mediator won't go to the courts because they're terrified of what, they're broke and they couldn't do it. And so you've got two bad outcomes for a system that should work but isn't, because the law is one of the things that falls under the powers of the state, and the state should regulate because it's a basic fundamental principle of a democracy. And they are not regulating it properly because, let's face it, plenty of politicians are lawyers. So that is my comment on what happened to the law industry. And this is an opportunity for your viewers to go and read the work of Jonathan Sumption and his book, The Trials of the State, which is all about the overreach of law and how law can be corrupted into destroying the principles of democracy. And that is destroying the family unit by this profiteering from its misery is one of the problems of our society at the moment.
Absolutely. Kurt, have you got any thoughts on possible renovations, improvements to the family law court system in Australia?
Yeah, I definitely agree, particularly with what Ellie was picking up on in terms of the incentive of money for lawyers. And I think there's actually just a whole lot of layers to it. You mentioned one as well earlier, Dave, in that parents, like you said, it could be either gender, weaponizing their children against the other partner in the marriage. And so there's multiple layers. There's revenge, there's financial profits for the third party groups. And so I think there's just a whole lot of issues that need to be looked at. And I probably don't have too much expertise in this area, but I think anything that can incentivize courts to deal with problems as soon as possible, and also to somehow prevent one spouse from weaponizing children against the other, I think is a move in the right direction.
I'd love to see a priority put on kids that's absent right now. The love of justice, we talk about it's better to set 10 guilty men free than it's an old principle and philosophy of law that it's better to set 10 guilty men free than to convict and punish an innocent man wrongly. Well, I think we need that kind of burden on protecting kids, that it would be better to let some injustice or hasty things happen rather than, let some kids go perhaps years without being having access to their parents denied by the arbitrary actions and decisions of one of the parents. That should be criminal for a parent to preempt a court's decision.
Well, let's be real. The politicization of the family court system happened for a good reason originally, and that was that women, in particular, this is why it's a gendered issue in the family courts. Women were victimized by violent men, and everyone knows that men and women have similar problems, but as a statistical majority, women were suffering under violent marriages, and they were financially dependent on their husbands when this whole thing started. So
and decades ago, that was a very real concern. You're right.
Yeah, and that had to be addressed. The problem is, of course, that as politics changed underneath this pretty solid first principle, we now have women turning that presumption of the courts trying to genuinely help what is a physical and emotional and financial imbalance into what you correctly called as a weapon. And so instead of there being some kind of common sense and judges who sit down and correctly view the situation as two equals coming to a table and trying to assess if someone's in real danger or if this is perhaps a money-making exercise or a punishment exercise, we've now got a blind sight of ideology which only punishes men and only empowers women regardless of their behavior, but at the same time still manages to set free violent offenders who then go and attack women. So we've actually got the worst of both possible scenarios happening at the moment.
Definitely. Ellie, let's put you on full screen. Hold your cup up to the camera and tell viewers where they can get it. A&P McRobert wants to know what it says.
It says, "Dear ABC, go fund yourselves," which is a hashtag a protest hashtag that I started against the ABC maybe last year or the year before, when they started their little witch hunt of the free press. So this mug and this hashtag goes to funding my writing so that I can keep writing for you against the legacy government-powered press. And you can find the link on my blog. I think you're going to put the link up for me as well. It comes in pink for the girls and red for the boys, or whatever you want to mix it up. It's fine by me. I also have. Are
you gender stereotyping us?
Pardon?
Are you gender stereotyping us?
Absolutely. Although the reason it's pink is because I love pink. That's why it's in pink. It's an Ellie pink, but it also comes in red to sort of pin the communist ABC right to their target. So please pick one up, and we can join the whole little club of, defund the ABC, which have way too much power over our current media environment. And
so can we get that on your blog, did you say?
Yeah, I have a link on my Twitter, but I'll put it up again during in this one, and I'll give it to you so that you can put it up.
Yeah, we'll put that in the link beneath the video for everybody.
Now, Kurt, independent writers.
Seeing we're supporting independent writers, Kurt, why don't you tell us about your book? There's a great opportunity to go to Kurt's blog where there's lots of great writing. I'm proud to feature some of his articles on The Good Source. Only the best, of course, but all of his great writing is available at his blog, and he's just released a book which you can also buy to support him. Over 1,000 copies sold already, going gangbusters, called Cross and Culture. Tell us all about the arc of the book there, Kurt, and why somebody would want to read that.
Yeah, so I've been blogging for around about 5 or 6 years, and in some ways this book is a culmination of a whole range of different topics that I've brought together. It's almost all new material, but it sort of covers the content that I've been working on for that time. And essentially I've asked the question, can Jesus save the West? And when I started writing this 2 years ago, the idea of the West needing to be saved was perhaps bubbling under the surface for some, but was not so obvious to the majority. But here we are after COVID, here we are after race riots, after a lot of turmoil, a lot of issues, political polarization like we haven't seen in probably generations. And it seems like a more pertinent question than ever, can Jesus save the West? And so essentially what I'm doing in this book is 3 things. I'm looking at what are the Christian foundations of nations like Australia. I think we've all been sort of lulled into a sense of, well, secular is best, and if you cast aside religion, you cast aside superstition, then we can finally advance and progress. But in fact, there's a Christian foundation to almost everything that we appreciate about our lives here in the West, whether that's freedom, democracy, compassion, human rights, even science has very strongly Christian foundations. So that's the first thing I'm trying to do. The second thing I'm doing is explaining what happens when we abandon that Christian foundation. And I guess conservatives are generally fairly well tuned into this, into these concerns. When we abandon objective morality, when we abandon spiritual understanding and truth, then we end up with moral chaos. And so I really dive into that issue. And then finally, I more in terms of answering the subtitle of the book, I ask, what is it as believers that we can do in these really interesting times we find ourselves in to be able to make a difference and see our societies restored and see morality return and see belief in God start to impact some of these issues. So that's a really quick snapshot of the book. I encourage you to grab a copy, Cross and Culture, Can Jesus Save the West? That's at my blog. If you just Google my name, Kurt, my surname's a bit difficult to spell, but Kurt and then Cross and Culture book, you should find it pretty easily. And I think 1,000 copies have sold in the last 2 months since it's been published. So it's going really well. Encourage you to jump on there and have a look.
Fast on the way to becoming a New York Times bestseller.
Congratulations.
One day, maybe. Thanks so much, Ellie.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my book out at the moment, and it's such a learning curve to try and publish something yourself. I've got one called Twitterati, and it's taking all of my time.
Yeah, it was huge. It was a 2-year journey, and the last 6 months of that was almost all consuming. So I feel your pain.
Well, also joining us.
Sorry.
I've just reblogged that link for you guys, so it is on Twitter now.
Brilliant.
Beautiful. Thank you. Now, also joining us tonight is Damien Curry, a great podcast that's also featured on the Good Source and now also made in video format as well. Sorry, mental blank. Words hard.
Beautiful word.
That's right. So welcome, Damien.
Hi, guys. Hi, how are you, David? Yeah, this video thing is quite challenging. I got to tell you, it's a whole different universe for me as a radio guy. So I did work in television briefly, but yeah, it's tough.
Now, were you one of the 327 people who reviewed Cross and Culture for Kurt?
No, absolutely not. But I definitely want to read Kurt's book. I absolutely do. It's good to see you again, Kurt. Hi, Ellie.
Likewise, good to see you.
Yeah,
it is very good. I tell you what, you got a good review from John Dixon, Kurt.
What was that? Sorry, Dave?
You got a good review from John Dixon. I saw you share that, and I saw him share it. It was a very, very sincere and genuine endorsement from a left of centre Christian.
I was very heartened by that. He had a couple of caveats in there, which we'd actually spoken about in private before he sent the endorsement through, but I was extremely grateful for him to endorse it as wholeheartedly as he did.
It actually makes it all the more genuine, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Damien, your show released this morning on the Good Source is just fantastic. You've done some excellent research and commentary, really, on the current situation, which really is highlighted at this time of year every year, and that is the trauma and suffering of Indigenous Australians.
Yeah, and I think what's good about what you'll see in the podcast, I've just taken a clip from a really good interview between Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, who are two more liberal centre-right Aboriginal elders and Aboriginal leaders in our community, who take a pretty good have a pretty good perspective on things, and particularly Warren Mundine's written a report called "It's the Economy Stupid. This is the only way to close the gap," is to really help there be a viable economy in Aboriginal communities around Australia and provide the circumstances for that to happen. But we've got to I think, move in that direction, because the approach that we're taking with the welfare state mentality, surprise, surprise, isn't working. So
yeah.
No surprise.
Now, Warren has a great deal of his own business experience, very successfully, and he's also had a great deal of experience in helping Indigenous Australians run and support their businesses with various government policies. It'd be great to see him be able to get his hands and some sensible street smarts into the wheels of bureaucracy that are currently trying to help and not really changing very much at all.
No, well, I think we've reached the point when you've got that sort of volume of money going in. It's $33 billion, according to the Productivity Commission report from 2017, which represents $44,000 of government expenditure for every Indigenous Australian, assuming there are 850,000 roughly Indigenous Australians at the moment. And that's double government expenditure for non-Indigenous Australians at about $22,000 per person per year. So we're talking about a significant amount of money. 2/3 of that is for the delivery of the regular government services like Medicare and unemployment benefits and family benefits and things like that. So that's 2/3 of it. There's another 18% which is related to the additional costs of delivery services in remote areas, because it does cost more to deliver services in remote areas. And then there's 18% which is purely for our Indigenous programs. So that would represent about probably, what is that, 18%? Say, a fifth of the total amount. So about $6 million that's in, programs just specifically for Indigenous Australians, on top of the higher use of the other programs. So it is, it's double the spending of non-Indigenous Australians by government. It's an enormous amount of money, and we are seeing the results. We're seeing an industry that's formed, and as welfare does, unfortunately, it can, promote inactivity, and without productive work or without a sense of purpose that comes from that, then really your physical, your spiritual health, everything declines. Your mental health. And now we've got this generational problem where the situation has been through many generations. It's really tough.
Well, joining us now from Sydney is academic and writer Dr. Anthony Dillon. Anthony, it's fantastic to have you join the panel tonight. Welcome to The Good Source, not Q&A.
Okay. Looks like I'm in some good company there. People.
Which my monitor's going a little bit slow. So, Anthony, thanks for joining us tonight, and just jumping straight in with the conversation that's already going. You've heard Damien's thoughts and his research on the double portion per person that Indigenous Australians on average receive from federal government funding, as opposed to non-Indigenous Australians. Is that a fair way to measure and assess the allocation of funds? Is that a reliable number to, be weighing?
Double?
Yeah, Damien, just recapitulate that again for us.
Yeah, so, it's $22,000 per head for non-Indigenous Australians, the amount of government funding that's spent, and then for Indigenous Australians, it's $44,000 a head, and that's totals $33 billion a year. But that includes government funding for regular services, so it's a direct comparison of the two. And obviously, there's greater need, and some of that is relates to the costs of delivery of remote services. And some of that is direct, a small proportion is the direct, 18% I think is the direct Aboriginal services that are specifically for Indigenous Australians only.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Your thoughts on the usefulness of those numbers, Anthony?
Yeah, look, obviously there's a greater need there. So I personally don't have a problem with more money in principle being allocated, but I'm sure most people would agree that how it's spent is the problem and what it's spent on.
Exactly.
And the other thing, it was good that it was mentioned about remote areas. And Nicholas Rothwell wrote an article in The Australian about a decade ago, and he summed it up so well. And he got the idea from Tony Abbott, actually, where he said it's about place, not race. So it's not so much being Aboriginal, it's living in these remote communities. That's the problem. So the point I want to make is you can't just see homogenous people as Aboriginal people as an homogenous group.
Yeah, agreed.
All equally disadvantaged. We've got people like me, that is, leading a good life in the sense that I know where I'm sleeping tonight. I know where my next meal is coming from. I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to be bashed or robbed or anything like that. And then you've got many other Indigenous people at the other end of the spectrum, and the money isn't reaching them in a proportionate way. So I think we need to be smarter about how we spend money. And yes, look, the other thing to realise is money is wasted in the system for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So, a lot of money gets wasted for non-Indigenous people in the bureaucracy and all that sort of thing.
Well, that's certainly true.
Yeah, but with Indigenous people, I don't think you can afford to waste a cent. So we want to get as much of that dollar, every dollar, we want to get as much of it going directly towards helping those Indigenous people who are most disadvantaged. And that is, generally speaking, in the remote areas.
How do you think... sorry, you weren't finished?
Oh, I was just going to say, did I answer your question?
Yeah. I think it's a very good point. Like, I take the point that there's double the amount being spent on Indigenous Australians than non-Indigenous Australians, and I'm not sure if I'm meant to be shocked by that, or if there is a good explanation which provides some context to that. And as Damien said, the tyranny of distance and remoteness quite often explains a lot of the cost of delivery. And I'm surprised that only 18% of that total is specific. How did you phrase that? Specific to being Indigenous, Damien?
Just specific to programs that are designed for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians and not designed for non-Indigenous Australians. So it's 18% of the 33 billion that's specifically programs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and it's 18%, which is the cost of delivering normal programs and those other programs to remote Australia. And then the other 64%, so almost 2/3, is the cost of delivering the regular government services to Aboriginal Australia. So if you're saying, Aboriginal Australians are getting special treatment because they have all these special programs, you can't say that's $33 billion, right? It's only 18% of that $33 billion that goes to Aboriginal Australia as a special thing for special programs for, positive discrimination programs for advancement. The 64% it works out to be in dollar terms a larger amount, obviously, at the end of the day, than is going to the average non-Indigenous Australian. So yes, there are more Indigenous Australians reliant upon these government funding, the normal regular government.
And that's a good point too. The average non-Indigenous person would be the beneficiary of economies of scale, where it's a lot cheaper to not just because proximity to services, but because of volume of services delivered.
There could be that component to it as well. So I was looking around the world to see, just what other government levels of expenditure. That's total government expenditure when we say 33 billion. And that would, represents $44,000 per Aboriginal person if there's about 850,000 Aboriginal people. And then you've got the rest of the population, government expenditure would be about 22,000 per person. So, it's a dangerous thing to say. Yes, it's exactly, we're spending double on Aboriginal Australians when there's a multitude of reasons for that. And I'm not suggesting that these programs shouldn't exist. All I'm saying is that, Australia is a country that's quite generous to its Indigenous people. We like our Indigenous people. We want our Indigenous people to do well. I've never met anybody on the left or right of politics that's a racist or that would wish ill on our Indigenous people on the basis of race. Yet we've got these claims of systemic racism, and that I think has to stop if we're going to solve this problem and we're going to be able to really come together. But I guess a lot of people have been saying that for many years. Anthony would know a lot more about that than I would.
Anthony, another pointy question for you is, how do you think we could spend the money better? How do you think the money's being wasted, and what's the right way to invest and supervise and monitor the usage of that money? I'm sure there's no silver bullet. There's not going to be an easy answer, but what are some of the thoughts you've got about the good ways we should be spending that money, which we aren't currently?
Yeah, okay, well, I guess there's the first one I said, and that is, don't just do it on the basis of your Aboriginal, but rather where the most disadvantaged Aboriginal people are. And I'll just read from this article that I'd mentioned before by Nicholas Rothwell. When Tony Abbott outlined his blueprint for Indigenous affairs, he broke new ground by highlighting the distinction between remote and urban Aboriginal societies, their circumstances, and their needs. In a few words, his speech challenged the chief fantasy that shapes national policy on Indigenous affairs, the notion that all Australians who identify as Aboriginal belong to a single community of interest and should be included in the same measures of progress and well-being. So, straight away we can see that. I guess another way of putting it is we need to close the internal gap, or what I call the internal gap, and that is the gap between Indigenous people like myself and those that are living in remote communities doing it really tough. So forget about this closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Let's focus on closing the gap within the Indigenous group between the well-off like myself and the less well-off Indigenous people. So
that sounds impossible, Anthony. That sounds like forced equality, which is the greatest form of inequality. I mean, there's going to be obviously unclosable gaps between somebody.
Sure, but I think you know what I mean. If we could get a majority or many Indigenous people who are living in squalor, conditions like we couldn't imagine, if we could, get them leading a life where parents are working, they're in school, they live in safe homes, that sort of thing, that, may not close that gap completely, but at least brings it up from the living in squalor up to something reasonable. Then the other thing is money should be invested in remote areas need to be looked at carefully. And if they are not economically sustainable, then we shouldn't be investing money that keeps the people there and just keeps them existing. But should invest in a sensible and sensitive exit strategy.
Well, that is contentious, and Tony Abbott did some things along those steps, which I remember he was being slammed and pilloried by the usual suspects for. But the reality is those communities weren't being closed; they just weren't being subsidised any longer.
Exactly.
And nobody was being forcefully relocated. We were just saying, look, we're not going to pay $1 million to run a water pipe. Or whatever. I mean, $1 million might not be very much. It might be an Austin Powers scenario. It might have been $100 billion to run a water pipe out to provide water for 7 people and a dog. That's just not a good use of taxpayer money. Alexandra, jump in.
Yeah, just before we move on to the next topic, I've never been a fan of nor endorsed race-based welfare systems in general. I think if we focus on need-based welfare systems, it will automatically pick up those communities, particularly remote communities, who are, of course, the most needy in that system in general, regardless of people's ethnicity. And that should help to pick up both the kids who fall through the cracks because their ethnicity doesn't match what the state wants to fund, and also to stop wasting money on people who are in better off areas, and so it can go to those who are the most disadvantaged. And so the idea that we continue to pour money in based upon race, I think it's not really a solution that's ever worked in general. It seems to be making the system worse. Whereas if we focus on helping any Australian who is most in need and then working our way back from there, I think we'll have a lot better luck with a fairer system and also a more productive system for everybody involved, including the remote communities who are by definition the most in need.
Yeah.
Is that what you were sort of alluding to, Anthony? Is that, do you feel, or could you explain for those of us who are not Indigenous, if there is a reason why we should probably pursue, a different approach with the Indigenous community, what that is, so we could understand it better?
Well, I was just going to follow up what Alexandria is. Sorry, did I get the name right? Alexandria. Yeah. What you said is a good idea. It will possibly upset a few people who have made nice little empires for themselves, cultural empires, in being the cultural experts. So that's one thing to consider, and I have no problem with upsetting those people.
Most of them are not Indigenous, are they, Anthony?
Well, a lot of them are Indigenous.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I know a few.
I've described it before. It's a bit like the butcher who has his hand on the meat when he's weighing, on the scale when he's weighing your meat. There's a vested interest in there for you. So, yeah, for sure, I agree with that. And so, yes, you get these cultural experts that insist that, if it's Aboriginal, anything Aboriginal, they have a completely different worldview. They have a completely different way of thinking, and you need us because we're the cultural experts and we understand them, and so we need to look after the services, etc., etc., etc. Now, for a small minority of Indigenous people, especially where English is not their first language, sure, there are some cultural differences there. I won't say barriers, just differences where some understanding is needed. However, for the vast majority of Indigenous people, and I've been with them even in remote communities, gosh, they're just like you and I in so many ways. Okay, they have the same basic needs, and but they think like us. They joke like us. They get along with non-Indigenous people. So I think while there is a need for some cultural expertise, that I think that's been exploited, and you got too many people who take their cut and insist that they're the only ones who can look after Indigenous people. Hence why you see this call for a voice. Okay, I think that's founded on that Indigenous people are so vastly different to non-Indigenous people that the mainstream system couldn't possibly understand them, and therefore we've got to have this Indigenous voice, whatever that means.
Yeah.
To represent.
Again, it assumes a homogenized nature of Indigenous thought, which is simply offensive.
Well, what's lost in this is I see, because I'm rural, I see lots of kids in these rural areas where some people, if they're Aboriginal, they are looked after on the welfare systems, and if they're poor kids of farmers who have literally nothing, they're completely ignored by the government because they don't fit the identity boxes, and we shouldn't be leaving any Australians behind. That's why if we focus on need, those who really do need to be assisted will be, instead of focusing on identities and the correct cultural boxes. That's not a good way to run a welfare system if your object is to help as many people as possible and to lift the general standard up for everyone.
And then you've got the opposite problem with Black kids who aren't getting the intervention and support that they need when they're in toxic and abusive situations, because those charged with the care of children are afraid of being accused of another stolen generation. And so white kids will get the protection and intervention they need when they're being abused by close family and domestic violence situations. But Black kids just get that little bit extra delay because there needs to be absolute confidence and proof that they're not going to end up in the media for trying to protect a kid.
All of which stems from this ideology of race before need. And that is such a terrible, insidious ideology to be inside the government systems, which are supposed to work for everybody equally as individuals.
Yep.
Can I throw another question in there, Dave? Sorry, Anthony, you go.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, and I think Rothwell, the writer of the Australian article, and Abbott, their view of it's about place, not race, approximates what you're saying. It's not, it's not a perfect sorter, but if we focus more on place rather than race, you'll allocate money more where it's needed.
Yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I mean, I really like what Anthony said about place, not race. I think that's really important. And also just the fact that a lot of these communities are remote and that the need is greater. So in principle, spending a lot more on Indigenous Australians is not something I'm against. I don't have a strong opinion on one way or the other. But one question that could be asked is, at the end of the day, is finances or is money actually what's needed to solve some of the deeper issues? Obviously, it's going to go a long way for health, for crime, for all sorts of issues, but it's not going to get us all the way there to resolve some of the more entrenched problems that are a concern. So I've got friends who have lived in Aboriginal communities, and I also, I read a fair bit in the media about some of the problems. Domestic violence has been mentioned, and sexual abuse, and suicide rates, and health. I know that money is going to help in some ways, but are there non-material, non-monetary ways that some of these problems can be resolved? I'd just be interested to hear everyone's thoughts, and particularly Anthony.
Great question. Anthony.
Yeah, like you said, you certainly need money, but as for the other non-monetary things, I think the ideology of promoting this whole idea that if you're Indigenous, you are so vastly different to non-Indigenous. And of course, you know, we see this problem where it mean you've got that much Indigenous ancestry in you, and therefore you're almost like a different species. So I think that's got to end. Okay, and we can still celebrate our oneness and our unity, and recognise that there are some cultural differences, but they're you know, down on the hierarchy. Or is that up? I'm not sure, but you know what I mean. We should be celebrating our commonality, and all programs that are intended to help Australians, particularly Indigenous people, should start with the assumption and end with the assumption that the commonalities between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people far outweigh the differences. So get our minds around that one, and I think that will be a really good way to go. And I just want to emphasise, I'm not trying to throw everyone into the same basket and say, you know, the whole of Australia is homogenous. Great, celebrate your culture and that sort of thing. But remember, at the end of the day, the basic needs for both groups are the same. And one of my favourite philosophers, Anthony Dillon, said, you know, we've all got a thin exterior of culture. Just scrape off the culture and we're all the same. We all have the same problems, the same needs.
Interesting.
That's great.
Yeah. Anthony, tell us a little bit about the article you had published on news.com.au on Australia Day.
Okay, well, a couple of years, I've been writing on Australia Day for nearly a decade, and last year I decided I'm not going to write anymore in case unless I get asked to do so. Only because I felt I've said enough already. And I was asked to write this article. It was nice to be invited. And I've said, you know, stuff similar to what I've said before. And that is basically, I stayed up front. I'm not in favour of changing the date. And the opposition you get to that is, well, it's been changed many times before. And to me, that's not a good reason for changing it again. And I guess the other biggie you get is, well, you know, what would it hurt? How would it hurt to change it anyway? It'll make a lot of other, you know, Indigenous people happy. And I think the biggest problem with that is, first of all, I do not believe the day or the celebration of the day upsets anyone. And to try and convince an Aboriginal person that you must be upset or you must be mourning or you must feel oppressed on 26th of January is very disempowering.
Yeah.
On Australia Day, nobody is celebrating theft or genocide.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, we're celebrating that Australia is a great country. Okay? And yes, you know, certain events happen, you know, on 26th of January, just like it did in 1949 when we became, you know, the Citizenship Act or whatever it was called. So I'm very opposed to telling people we must change it because it hurts Aboriginal people, and if we change it, it'll stop hurting them. That will just reinforce in the Indigenous person's mind, oh, I really must be upset. Australia Day really must upset me, or else the government wouldn't change it. So that's where we've got to be careful. Does that argument make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of sense.
Yeah, I think
that's the main point I want to make. And just one other point on that, something I didn't write about. I see ABC got into a little bit of trouble where they used the term Invasion Day, and they were asked not to. I personally didn't think that was a good move for government to intervene, only because if you try and tell the ABC they cannot use the Invasion Day, the protesters and the blacktivists will see that as further evidence of oppression, you know. So I would have just let them, you know, say, look, call it whatever you want. We know that with the ABC, they've got a low bar to begin with.
Yeah.
So by telling them you can't say it, just means that people are going to say it even more.
Yeah, it's true. Well, let's ask the viewers, what do you think? Should the government have stepped in and told the ABC to fix their inaccurate headline, which had Australia Day / Invasion Day on their website? So viewers, leave a comment beneath the video now on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching this, and tell us, should the government have stepped in, or should the government have just let them do what they want because of reasons Anthony said? Yeah, of course, we know that the lying harlot media can't be trusted to report accurately, which is why you need to support the good source. You can help us fight fake news by becoming a partner with a supporter, just to help us continue production of shows like this and the other ones that are being released every day on the Good Source website, goodsource.news. Also, make sure that you head over there and become a subscriber to the email newsletter. If you do that, you are guaranteed to not be cut off from us when, not if, we get kicked off the corporate social media channels. So what we're trying to do is disrupt the mainstream media and provide a objective and honest and transparent source of news and opinions. We won't call our opinions news, and we won't call use euphemisms that the left do for all kinds of obfuscation of reality. It's very important that we be honest about that. And so if you want a reliable source of news and opinions, then please put your hand in your pocket and become a monthly supporter of the Good Source. So what comments do we have already? I just need to take that banner off. Mama says the government should defund the ABC. And AMP McRoberts say that the ABC should provide all sides of an issue. Very true and very clear, of course. Let's go to the panel. What do you guys think? Should the government have stepped in, the minister asked them to provide a more accurate headline? Alexandra, what do you think?
Well, it depends on whether they want to be known as a government news organisation that is fair and balanced and adhering to its charter, or whether they want to be a propaganda arm of a Marxist revolutionary movement. And they're welcome to be either of those things, but the second one doesn't come with public funding. So it's up to them what they want to identify as.
Yeah, absolutely. Damien, what do you think? Was obviously the substance of the government's criticism, I think most of us would agree, was fair, if not understated. But was it wise and prudent to step in, or should they have let the ABC do their craziness as they always do?
The idea that the government has no right, the elected government that is elected by us democratically, that's supposed to represent the people of Australia, the idea that the government has no right to comment on what the ABC is doing or instruct the ABC to do certain things is a myth. And it's a myth perpetuated by media scholars who have a particularly bizarre view of the role of the ABC and the charter of the ABC. Government interference is when the government, is instructing for political reasons, very specific political reasons, the ABC to do something. But if the government is saying to the ABC, look, these things that you're doing are inappropriate or are sowing division in our society, who else is the ABC accountable to if not the government? And that's what frustrates me about the ABC. They're not accountable to the free market, so they can do whatever they like.
That's the problem.
You will always. You can tell I'm passionate about this because I'm a
fire up, Damien.
I'm a former ABC employee, and I'm particularly interested in the media industry. But we have a ridiculous situation because you've got the ABC is culturally, any organization is going to develop a culture, right? And anybody who works in that organization is either going to fit that culture and stay or not fit that culture and leave. Okay. So if you don't have people at the top of the culture saying, we've got to stick to our charter, we've got to drive for balance in our reporting, we've got to look at the scope of Australian opinion, and we've got to fall somewhere in the middle and try to take in opinion from all sides. And we have to challenge underlying assumptions, which they never do. It's not what the ABC reports, it's what they don't report. It's what
right.
they say on Q&A or the drum. It's what they don't say on Q&A and the drum. Someone comes on with a far left, neo-Marxist identity politics, woke, cultural, whatever you want to call it, but a left or left of center view, and they make outrageous statements and assumptions that are based on the assumptions of critical race theory or critical gender theory, and nobody says, hang on a moment, that's critical race theory or that's critical gender theory. Let's challenge that. Here's Anthony Dillon to challenge that for you, or here's Warren Mundine to challenge that, or Jacinta Price to challenge. No, it just goes through to the keeper as if it's fact, and that is what changes the culture externally. Internally, it then becomes very difficult if you're in the ABC to stay there if you have views like mine. So I would never be able to work at the ABC, even if they'd give me a job, which they wouldn't. I'd never get in the door, but if I did get in the door, I couldn't stay in the door. And this is where we're at. So if the ABC is not accountable to the marketplace because it's government funded, who is it accountable to? Okay,
Yep.
It can't just be accountable to itself, because that's $1 billion government taxpayer funded gift to people who think like Kerry O'Brien and Quinton Dempster. Okay, and I'm not comfortable with that, because
Damien.
I have different views to Kerry O'Brien and Quinton Dempster, and I'd like to be able to express them and get paid like they do for it. But you know, I won't cry too much, because I've had a very happy, successful career in life, and I'm very fortunate and that's why I try to give back by doing my show. But I'm not getting paid for it, and it's costing me money. So how is that fair, right?
The government should have taken the ABC down to 18C for racial stirring and racial unrest, and that would have been quite a beautiful thing to behold.
Well, I think the only way to solve these problems is to tie them up in their own knots, and I think that's you've got to take the woke stuff and use it against them, if you like, their own rules against them.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, we saw the ABC conduct a witch hunt against George Pell, very prejudicially reaching conclusions well beyond the evidence, which 7 High Court justices to 0 decided was so preposterous that he should never ever be tried again for those ridiculous charges and accusations, given the lack of evidence and plausible testimony against him. And likewise, Michael Rowland this morning tweeted something about how terrible it was that the government should not be pulling aside or pulling into line those members of the parliament which disagree, such as George Christensen and Craig Kelly. And I suggested to Michael Rowland that he might want to, as a journalist, interview the scientists and experts which dissent with the chief medical officer. He hasn't responded to my suggestion just yet. But Kurt, what do you think? Power and authority questions aside, was it prudent for the government to step into that flagrantly racist headline calling Australia Day also Invasion Day?
Look, I probably would hedge my bets and say I don't think either way is really going to be a game changer, because as we've been talking about, the issues with the ABC are a lot more fundamental than one particular headline. I think, like Damien was saying, the government has every right to step in and say what they did. Was it wise? Was it helpful? I mean, I agree with Anthony that that could just kind of give bait to the neo-Marxists. So I don't really see a resolution on this particular issue, but I think maybe the best solution is that we just go out and buy one of Ellie's mugs and tell the ABC to go fund themselves.
That would be wonderful. Anthony, before we let you go, your thoughts on the anti-competitive nature of the ABC being so completely detached from free market realities. Is there a realistic way that can be achieved, that they do get accountable to the free market instead of the government?
Yeah, look, I really don't know. It's good to call them out, but I don't have an answer for you. Sorry on that one.
That's okay. We super appreciate your. Sorry, continue, please.
No, I just want to say, it's good. We're lucky that we've got this freedom that we can criticise them. So
Right.
I wouldn't want to see that. Right.
And that's one of the things I celebrated on Australia Day, the freedom to live in a country, the treasure. It's not just a freedom; it's actually an asset.
It's a miracle
of living in a nation where we can criticize the government and we can not be afraid of the police knocking on our door just yet. Kurt, your article posted today about the lack of free press coming to the West rapidly, like journalists being arrested, citizen journalists being arrested in China, was insightful. But at this stage, it's still one of the things we can celebrate about Australia, is that we have this freedom where we can criticize the press and criticize the ABC and criticize the government and not be negative. And I'm not saying criticism's a job in itself, but to critically analyze, review, and hold to account those people and powerful institutions, not just the government, but certainly the media in Australia is very important. And Anthony, I really appreciate the writing you do as a leading voice among Indigenous Australians. I know there's many who think like you and would be encouraged by the fact that you echoed their voices, while so many in the media would represent Indigenous people as a homogenous bunch of complaining infants. So thank you for your voice, because you're providing a much more flattering view of right-thinking people in Australia. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We will see you soon. Now, Kurt, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your article?
Wait,
sorry?
I gotta go.
You got to go? Ellie, I was counting on you being here all night.
It's probably something I said.
I'm inhabiting somebody else's space, and I'm getting text messages like, "Can you leave, please?" I'm like, yeah.
That was the vibrating we heard. Very good.
That is exactly what you heard. That was a sibling going, "Get out of my room. Thanks."
And you look, a final plea as we say goodbye to Ellie. Please donate to her Ko-fi account. The link is beneath her articles on the Good Source. And she needs to be able to get her own room so she can do a whole live stream without getting booted. We have
expand the vampire cave a little bit further.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Ellie. It's wonderful chatting with you and hearing your articulate thoughts on everything. Right-thinking queen of Twitter, Alexandra Marshall. Good night.
Good night. See you boys later. Bye.
See you, Ellie. Great to see you.
And then there were three. So good. Damien, what else was in your show this morning that people need to go and have a look at? On
gosh, I have to think and try and remember now. What else was in the show? Well, we had, as I said, we had Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine. That clip, that was actually recorded back in August, but if you didn't see it, it really is a terrific interview and great explanation of Warren Mundine's paper that he wrote for the Centre for Independent Studies on building the Aboriginal economies and how remote economies, some way, and using the funding to support the development of business and meaningful, work for people. And viable communities that are going to get out of these sort of perpetual problems that we're seeing. We also we had a look. We have a very funny comedian. We're having a look at every week now. We're going to be doing a little spot at the end where we.
That's a new segment for you, isn't it? That was actually funny.
Yeah. Well, you got to laugh. You need a laugh after all. It's a crazy world, so we've got to have some
laughing
fun.
is good,
and laughing is excellent. So. We're going to be finishing off with a usually sort of comedian that might be considered to be a little centre away from the sort of typical left-wing comedy that we're bombarded with, because there's plenty of great right-wing comedy out there, believe me, and great centrist, anti-sort of woke, anti-political correctness, but good, clean, fun, sensible, smart, intelligent comedy. So we're trying to focus on that. There's also a little bit of a clip from Candace Owens' show this week. We took the clip out of that. That's a really amazing interview with a comedian that she does.
Do
Talking
you get
about
copyright notices, infringement on the little clips that you show?
No, I hope not. We're really just promoting, and showing a little bit of this content to sort of say, this is out there. Go and check it out. And we have the links. So the show is meant to be kind of a way to, it's a summary of the stuff that we see, and we just give you a taste of it, and then put the link in so you can go and watch the full thing. But we haven't had any complaints yet. I think people are happy for the ecosystem to have that. But if anybody does have an issue, we'll stop promoting you.
I played a little YouTube clip at the end of my show on Tuesday from The Seekers. I am, you are, we are Australian, and it's not a strike.
That's different. Yeah, the music copyright is a very different thing. But yes, you can only anytime that I've put in 7 seconds of I think I put in 7 seconds of an AC/DC song once, and yes, I got copyright flagged on that. So it must be automated and very effective. So we a little clip from that, and there's also Douglas Murray's done a fantastic 5-minute. I don't know if anybody follows PragerU, but PragerU is the organization in America set up by the talk show host Dennis Prager. Thank God he set this up to counter the bombardment from the likes of Vox and trying to remember the name of the other one now. The other huge, BuzzFeed. Thank you. And these guys who are just now. This is another one. They're just constantly pumping out. Sort of identity politics type propaganda to our kids in university age. And Dennis Prager wanted to reach kids with these videos, and they've just taken off. They've just exploded. So there are many up. They've been running for a few years now, and there's lots of great videos. And he gets in very intelligent. People say, "Oh, it's not a university. Why is it called PragerU? It's not a real university." No, it's not meant to be a real university. Nobody said it was a real university. Since when did
lefties care about definitions or reality?
Exactly. So it's basically the people he gets on is what's important, right? And they're able to put on a 5-minute, and they don't do these very lightly. They only do 52 a year, and there are lots of topics they could be covering. They select very carefully the topics. They work with the academics or the writers behind those topics. They only bring out the very best experts, and they take their theories and put them into a 5-minute animated video and have them present it. And Douglas Murray's done a terrific one this week about cancel culture and cancelling history, which I thought was incredibly timely. It came out on Australia Day morning, so I don't know whether they were thinking about Australia when they put it out, but it definitely had an impact.
Well, my guests right now are Kurt Malberg and Damien Coury. For those people who are wondering how to spell Damien's last name, it's Coory, and Kurt is Kurt. Malberg, Mahlburg.
Well done.
It's a very distinguished Kurt. If I was ever going to change my name, I'd take. No, I wouldn't change my name.
Good to know.
Look, for those who missed the announcement earlier in the show, nearly an hour ago, Senator Pauline Hanson, has had to give her apologies. Last minute change of plans for her has come up tonight, and we appreciate her being available ever, and so certainly need to be gracious and understanding when the sudden life of a senator and federal party leader means that she can't come on as we advertised. But we promise we will get her on as soon as possible, maybe next week or the week after. I really want to have a chat to Pauline, amongst other things, about the family law court, things that are being handed down. But also, we have an important election coming up in Western Australia. The Western Australian state election is on the 13th of March. That's just 2 weeks after the most important event in the Australian calendar this year, the Australian Church and State Summit, which will be held in Brisbane and Hobart, as well as online. So there's no excuse for missing out. Let me see, I think we've got a little banner there. The churchandstate.com.au is where you can get your tickets. That is a specifically Christian conference, with lots of Christian speakers, but it's not exclusive to Christians. Everybody is welcome, and we will be just teaching that Christians have a valid, incredible, and necessary place in the public square. We'll be talking about policies and comparing the history of various ideologies which have led to different levels of human flourishing in world history, and Christian contributions to that have scored very, very well. And so we have a valid place in debate, of course. But the West Australian election is 2 weeks after that, and that is the 13th of March. So we're going to be trying to bring on quite a few West Australian politicians and commentators over the next 6 weeks as we lead up to the WA election. And Pauline Hanson will be a great part of that conversation, as well as some people who are local. So if you're a sand groper across there on the other side of the country, which is still part of Australia, despite some efforts, it would be good to hear from you. Who do you think? Where are the battleground seats? What are the key issues facing West Australians? And then, of course, on the evening of the 13th of March, we will be holding an election night coverage panel here on The Good Source. So make sure you stay tuned to and look out for that. Well, boys, any suggestions? Where should we go? Let's start bringing this home, maybe wrap it up in the next 5 to 15 minutes, or to the viewers. Also, are there any topics, questions we should talk about with you guys before we wrap up? Not Q&A for this second episode of 2021. Damien, Kurt, final issue for the night.
We can take a quick look at the article. I know you segued into it earlier and then we got sidetracked, I think, when people were leaving. So we can do that if you like, or if you'd rather wrap up, that's fine.
Was that the article you wrote about the free media and China?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, please. That's a great one. Anything's good. I just like talking to you.
Great, awesome. Well, so this one was just published today. I wrote it a couple of weeks ago, but it essentially is. What was that? Sorry.
Shh! Don't tell people you wrote it a couple of weeks ago.
And in any case, I've tried to aggregate a whole series of stories that came out last year, and I guess they sort of leaked out eventually, but they weren't on front page, of newspapers, because they're very embarrassing for the mainstream media. One person after another, most of them, really well profiled journalists working for major news outlets were essentially ousted in one form or another, whether that was them losing their jobs, being sacked, quitting. So Matt Taibbi is one of those. And for people that are familiar with this whole area of journalistic censorship, these names may be familiar, but I'll just give the names to you in case you're not, because they're worth looking up, each of these stories. Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone magazine, James Bennett of the New York Times. There was also, who do we have? Barry Weiss, also from the New York Times, Andrew Sullivan from the New Yorker magazine, and Glenn Greenwald as well. And then I also went into J.K. Rowling, and she joined with 160 others, journalists and academics, who wrote the Harper letter, which made headline news last year as well. And essentially it's one story after the next of people from very well-known, supposedly reputable journalistic outlets who were sacked or who quit because essentially they had ideas that in almost every case were actually left of centre, but did not fit in with the woke orthodoxy, and they were made to feel as though they had no place in the particular journalistic outlets they were working for, and parted ways. And to me, that really summarised 2020 in so many ways. And I think seeing all of those stories one after the other is really quite shocking to realise what developed in such a short space of time over the last 12 months.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I think, I often talk about how I've just come home after 20 years abroad, and the culture shock, or the reverse culture shock that I have experienced since coming home really hit me on the 26th of January. It's the first time that I've seen an Australia Day, or been here for an Australia Day in 20 years, and I couldn't believe the lack of goodwill and the lack of spirit expressed by so many people that were protesting. It just doesn't seem to me to be. My concern about changing the date is that if we change the date, is it going to make any difference to the protests? Because the 26th doesn't really represent the invasion, because they arrived between the 18th and the 20th, actually, in Botany Bay, and then couldn't find water, so moved to Sydney Cove, as the story goes, planted the flag on the 26th. But I don't know that there was any significant battle on that particular date. So is it the date, or is it that we're using Invasion Day?
It's a proxy for the existence of Australia altogether that they object to.
Yeah, so it wouldn't matter when you had Australia Day, you'd still have this Invasion Day mentality happening. So I don't see any point in moving the date. I get where people are coming from if it's very hurtful to the Aboriginal people to reflect on that. But let's talk about something else. Let's make it about something else, because it's not about that.
It's such a crock. Look, I get that some people are feeling hurt, but you know what? The world revolves around you. And I don't mean to be callous, but the most callous thing I could do, the most hateful thing I could do, would be to leave you in ignorance and error. And that would be hateful. For me to not tell you you're wrong would be silly. I'm not going to use poorly chosen words, and I'm trying to choose them carefully. But the date is not hurtful. Here's the reality. There is not a single civilization on the face of the planet that hasn't been through what you're claiming you can't get past. My ancestors were taken slaves off the coast of Cornwall in England. Thomas Pellow, there's a book written about it. He was literally taken a slave and held captive from the age of 13. And, anyway, the book's really interesting. Good read. Get it on Amazon. But my Scottish ancestors were dispossessed and disinherited by the British as well. And if you've lived in Europe, your nation has changed hands at least half a dozen times in the last 1,000 years. This is the nature of human history. There's not a single person who can't claim to have ancestral trauma that was experienced in Australia. And this is the nature of the world. And in fact, the claims that it was white man's fault, well, that's just racist. That's ignorant of the fact that the hundreds of tribes that inhabited this continent before colonization were constantly warring with and invading each other. It was an incredibly violent time in a culture that was stuck in the Stone Age due to the tyranny of distance. And that's a horrible thing. And that doesn't absolve the settlers and those people who were criminal and immoral in their actions toward Indigenous people in those times. It doesn't whitewash the fact that those things did happen as well as the good. But, we just have to get a little bit of perspective. And Australia Day is not Invasion Day. Australia Day is the day where we celebrate the things that we have in common. There are plenty of really great times and wise moments to reflect and lament on the things that we did wrong, historically and currently. Let's not just lament about the things which are race-based and wrong. Let's lament about the things that are age-based and wrong, like abortion. We've got a lot of blood on our hands in this nation, and to cherry pick the things that help exacerbate a racist narrative and politic of grievance divisionism, that's just playing into the Marxist handbook, and it's pure racism in itself. So no, we're not exceptional in our history.
Do you think people are waking up, guys? Do you think finally we're starting to see some change? I mean, we've been singing this song and I've heard others singing this song for many years. Surely people are starting to wake up more and more and more that what we're witnessing here is just deliberate politics of division on many different levels, playing out in many different areas. It's just, you cannot have power if you don't create division. That's the way the left sees it. There's the extreme left, the Marxists, who really want the revolution, right? So they're still, stuck in that craziness of 19th and 20th century Marxist theory of, needing to have a revolution and always wanting to create disunity, which is why you had Antifa people at the Capitol building and all that stuff. And you'll always have people agitating at different protests. But then you have another group who are, not quite as extreme, but they're just as rigidly, obsessively holding on to this idea that racism is real, and that somewhere out there is a mean bogeyman, and if we could just kill that mean bogeyman, it's those nasty right-wing people, if we could just get rid of them, then everything's going to be better. And that worries me a lot, because I think it's led to the change of government in the United States, which I think is pretty scary. And that we're heading for, because I look at policy, not personality, so I'm more interested in what they're doing than how they look, or how old they are, or how crazy they are. We're all a little bit nutty, but I'm really terrified.
There's a whole article there, Damien.
Yeah.
Personality, not policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt your flow. You're in a flow there.
Go. No. I just wanted to put it out there as maybe a final talking point.
Well, let me pick that.
Shall we discuss? Are we in this world? Are we at a horrible moment where we're seeing just this clinging to victimhood? My victim points are very important to me. I mean, people aren't going to change their mind. They're just going to, they listen to people like Tony. They listen to Senator Price. You listen to Warren Mundine. They just say, "Oh, well, they're just right wing." Horrible right wingers who don't understand the real Aboriginal. They're racist themselves, and all you white people talking about you're all racist and everybody's racist. And the reality is racism is not the problem. Racism is not the root of these problems. So
and we're never going to get rid of racists, just like we're never going to get rid of drunks and wife beaters and selfish people and greedy people. It's humanity. It's broken, it's corrupted, and it's fallible, and cultural pressure and evolution and maturity is the way to solve these things, not big stick legislation. Obviously, some of the things I said are violent crimes, and they should absolutely be made illegal. But, bad character, really bad character, total jerks are not something that you can outlaw. Because you're never going to get rid of them, and you're not going to change them with punitive measures. What you are going to change them with is better examples and peer pressure and a stigma. There should be a stigma on racism. There absolutely should be a stigma on racism. And it's a disservice to the power of the stigma to call everybody a racist, because now you're just destigmatizing racism by calling somebody who believes in sensible immigration policies a racist. That's just ridiculous. You're doing a disservice to the people who want to legitimately identify and call out and stigmatize a racist, a real racist, somebody who believes in their own superiority. And another example of badly labeling racism is tribalism, the natural inclination to trust people who look, talk, and sound like ourselves. That's a natural
psychological natural fact. Yeah, that's proven by science.
And any strength, any good thing to an extreme becomes a bad thing. A little alcohol, a bottle of wine with dinner amongst a couple of friends, great. But if it's 10 bottles of wine each with a hamburger, that's a good thing. That's gone way too far. And so
not your recommended diet, David.
Not my recommended diet, and also not on the menu at McDonald's. But calling a natural thing like just wanting to do business with somebody like yourself racism is just silly. That's not racism. Racism is hatred, and identity politics is a whole lot more closer to racism than tribalism. Some of the more innocent expressions of that. Let's wrap this up and bring it home. Actually, look, I want to contradict you, Vesna. I love some of your comments, but I think this one's wrong. The only type of racism in Australia today is reverse racism. No, like I said, jerks are jerks. They exist everywhere. Your point is probably that reverse racism is a lot more acceptable, and there's no stigma attached to that. well, that's probably a fair call. But there's plenty of racism, and they should be called out and stigmatized, the genuine, authentic kinds. Any other thoughts from you guys before we bring this home?
I guess just bouncing off of what Damien was saying earlier, just are people waking up? I think it's true that people are waking up. The events of last year, in particular, have to have gone a long way in helping people realise that something isn't quite right. And I realise a lot of that was centred around the pandemic, and unfortunately that's led to some conspiracy theories and whatever. But what it's done, I think, as well, is it's prompted people to be just a little bit more engaged in what is happening in the political sphere, what's happening in the social sphere. Words like globalism, words like Marxism have become a lot more understood and are becoming a helpful lens through which to view a lot of the changes that we're seeing. And so, yes, we've got a growing voice on the far left, as you were talking about earlier, Damien. But I think people are becoming a bit more willing to speak up when they don't agree with the current orthodoxy. I know for myself, I've realised that there's a lot of people I can't win over anymore. And so I've sort of given up trying to pander. That doesn't mean I'm not trying to be polite anymore, but I've realised there are certain people I'll never please, and so I'm willing to say more. I'm willing to push a bit harder, and I've noticed that that's the case with a lot of others too. And so I think people are waking up, and I think people are voicing that and in a healthy way.
Yeah. My final comment, David, would just be to echo what Kurt said. I think Dave Rubin's book, Don't Burn This Book, is interesting because rather than just sort of repeat the stuff that we've read from other authors on this, like Douglas Murray, he takes the position that we all need to start speaking out more, and that the silent majority can't continue to be silent. So that's why I do what I do. I could, happily not put out that show every week. It's pretty exhausting. Thank God I've got help from you guys and Matt and everything. But it's we do this because we care, and we're doing it because we believe that these things need to be said, because they're not being said in the mainstream media, and the public discourse isn't balanced. And that's why we're doing it. And I think it's a call to action to people to really get behind platforms like The Good Source, platforms like Discernible, platforms like books and publications like Kurt's, and following Ellie and me and whoever is really trying to kind of get this going, because we need we all are doing this pretty unfunded. So we need let's
give a shout out to Matt at Discernible, which is where your podcast is also hosted. Where can people find some of the content on Discernible?
Well, Discernible is discernable, not discernible. There's two spellings of that word I discovered. So, but it's actually discernable, and it's .io, which is an unusual suffix for the internet. But it's www.discernible.io. So I think .io is a bit of a geek suffix. It's got to do with ones and zeros and things, and Matt's a bit of a geek.
There we go. Yeah,
I'll pay for that comment later.
Don't know what you're thinking there, Matt.
People, we need your support. Keep things going. Keep sharing, and telling your friends. And I think eventually we'll be the mainstream media. It's happening in America. It's happening fast, but they're now into battle number 2, which is the big tech battle. We're still doing battle number 1. So.
Yeah. Well, my final plug for tonight is the Church and State Summit. It's the 4th annual summit, and I'd really love to have everybody there. Now, it actually does take quite a lot of time, planning, and money to put it on. So even if you're going to watch it online, there's going to be a small ticket fee to get in and buy it. They are exclusive. They won't be free to the public. In fact, there's quite a lot of people who are paying for their tickets full price to be there in person, and then making a generous donation on the top. So let me encourage you to do that. We're going to have venues in Brisbane and Hobart, and they'll all be COVID safe, and everything's going to be, but if you're the first on, you'll be the last off. If you're buying those tickets, you don't want to miss out. You do want to be there. We've got Cardinal George Pell speaking via video from Rome, including taking questions. We're going to have some Christian apologists, Christian people explaining why Christianity is true, and Carl Fays, Matt Canavan going to be explaining why Christianity is good, and then Saturday's sessions are all going to be about some meaty policy discussions for our nation and how we can actually improve policy. But the best thing is to get there and rub shoulders with people like you, and just be encouraged how not alone you are, how many of us there are who are in the trenches fighting the culture war and wanting to be salt and light in the public square. So everybody's welcome, but it is a Christian conference. So please, if you can, make sure you spread the word and grab your tickets now. Early bird price is still on for the next week or so, but they are selling out fast. And of course, if we do have to reduce numbers, then the people who bought their tickets last will probably be the first people who get a refund, and you will be safe. If we have to change capacity numbers, you will definitely be getting your money back. So there's no risk there whatsoever. And I believe we're going to be able to have a good couple of hundred in each location. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time tonight. Very generous, always great. And this show, Good Sources, Not Q&A, is primarily evolving this year to regularly feature the contributors and personalities of the Good Source platform, as well as special guests from time to time. So thank you, the viewers, for watching. Thank you very much for your comments and for sharing it, and for, of course, to the Good Source supporters who so faithfully and regularly put their hand in their pocket for a little or a lot each month, and just make sure we're able to do things like build this studio and get the equipment we need to continually increase our quality of production and content. And so we do have the capacity in the near future to really disrupt the lying harlot mainstream media, which absolutely must be taken down. We can't trust government to do it. We have to do it ourselves. So that's it from me. Thank you very much to you guys, and we will see you all on the interwebs. Good night.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye, everyone.